So, most people know that during World War II, Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of the British Empire, up until the near tail end of the war, when he was ousted from the British government via loss in elections, and Attlee became his successor afterwards. But what if this didn't happen? What if instead of Attlee coming to power as Prime Minister after Winston Churchill, it was Montgomery? Yes, that Montgomery, the legendary British general of North Africa himself. Now, I do think this absolutely goes without saying, but something like this is literally almost impossible. We would have to change so many different things for this to even come close to working, it's insane. This video is meant as a more hypothetical look into the extremely unlikely, just for fun and entertainment purposes. So, with that out of the way, let's get right to it, shall we? So, because just like I said, this scenario is insanely unrealistic, it doesn't really matter how Montgomery comes to power as Prime Minister. So I'll let you guys think of possible ways that he could actually come to power as the Prime Minister of the British Empire. And of course, if you're up for it, you can absolutely also comment your ideas in the comments down below. But anyhow, now with Montgomery successfully coming to power as Prime Minister, what happens next? Well, the whole overall political policy and or attitude of the British Empire changes with Montgomery now as Prime Minister, as towards the tail end of World War II, after the end of World War II, and during the Cold War, the British Empire was of course still quite prideful, and still quite active, and also still quite impactful, but all these aspects and more of the British Empire were sort of mellowed down by Attlee. But Montgomery, the proud British nationalist warrior he was, would take all of these aspects and just make them rise over the roof, to a completely new level. But, well, this would have both a good and a bad side to it. Good, because after the war, the British Empire really needed somebody to hold the empire together and give the people across the empire new hopes, and because Britain, now being way more open to interventions across the world and boldly butting heads with big nations, would have a significant impact on many conflicts in the Cold War. In a lot of cases, these impacts would actually be positive for the country siding with the British Empire. Like, for example, greater aid could be sent to these countries would have better trade connections and a much larger market to trade on, and so on and so on. Which could all give the British Empire quite a needed boost in terms of treasury, resources, world importance and impact as well, and so on and so on. But the bad sides to all of this would be firstly, the fact that all these newly gained resources and funds would definitely not be allocated properly, because, well, you see, Montgomery was a very prideful British nationalist to say the least, and so he would most likely spend way more money on the military side of things instead of actually helping out his people by giving them better living standards, higher wages, and just investing in his people more in general. This would lead to rapid stagnation and even massive fallback of the British economy, stability, and living standards, as the British Empire would see a slight rapid rise in stability, economy, and similar statistics right after the end of World War II, and then afterwards everything would start to rapidly snowball downhill for the British Empire. Secondly, remember how I said that an alliance with the British Empire during the Cold War would be beneficial for the newly established countries during the Cold War? Well, that would only be true for a short amount of time, before the British would start to undermine and exploit these nations, just like they did with their colonies and other occupied territories, which would definitely not make these nations happy, nor would it be alright for the British, seeing as we would have to spend absurd amounts of money and resources just to make sure that these British-friendly governments installed in these newly created countries wouldn't completely collapse. Speaking of colonies and occupied territories, thirdly, Montgomery's prideful nationalist ideas would probably lead him to try and keep the British Empire's lands under its control for as long as possible, under any cost, meaning a much more slower, costly, controversial, violent, and dark age of decolonization for the British Empire, which would altogether lead the country to have its very first true dark age in terms of economy, stability, politics, and living standards and so on, just a few years after the start of the Cold War, where all British stats, whether it's economy, stability or whatever else, would rapidly plummet down to a completely new catastrophic low, as the country would spend way too much money and resources on its military and outside interventions rather than on itself and its people. Due to all the bad factors that I have listed, The British Empire's global image would also rapidly deteriorate, as country after country would abandon the British Empire, not wanting to collaborate with a non-improving, nationalist, heavily militarized, and somewhat authoritarian-like state, as the British Empire would slowly start to collapse and turn almost completely isolationist. The British government would turn into complete chaos. Every single government meeting would turn into a shouting competition to see who could argue the most, as the government would become unstable, divided, and would not be able to make any choices at all. Now, a lot of people would suggest that the USSR would probably take advantage of a situation to cause some communist revolution in the British Empire or whatever else. But I don't think this would happen, because while the situation would be bad, I don't think it would be that bad. And, well, no matter how bad the situation gets, the USA would probably never allow that to happen, and would do anything in its power to stop anything like that from happening. In terms of the Cold War overall and its events and outcome, I don't think much would change in the grand scheme of things outside of a greater British intervention worldwide, which I believe would be mostly unsuccessful and wouldn't really change much due to the situation back at home and also the British Empire being so overstretched by this point. But anyhow, this dark age in the British Empire most likely won't last forever. This dark age would probably last a few years at most. Why, you might ask? Well, as I have just clearly laid out to you guys, Montgomery's way of ruling wasn't exactly the best, to say the least. And his political career would probably end a few years later, when he would be, similarly to Churchill, ousted from government via a terrible loss in elections, and would be replaced by somebody else. Now, would this new somebody be able to flip the British Empire's chances and fix what Montgomery would have broken? Who knows? I sure don't, as so many things would have changed in this scenario that I don't even know who would lead the nation or what would happen afterwards at all. But whoever it is, let's just hope we do a better job than Montgomery, because if we've learned anything from today's video, it's absolutely that being a legendary general doesn't necessarily make you a legendary politic.